Welcome to Healthy Kidneys After 60. I am your host, Jane Pauley, and today we are opening a conversation that might feel uncomfortable, perhaps even frightening, but it is one that simply cannot wait any longer. We often spend our later years worrying about the big names in illness, yet there is a quiet, stealthy predator moving through the veins of millions of seniors as we speak, often without a single shout of pain until it is far too late. Joining me today to shed light on this shadowed corner of our health is a man who has spent over 5 decades at the intersection of medicine and human stories, a trusted voice for generations, and the chief medical correspondent for CNN, Dr. Sanjay Gupta. Dr. Gupta, it is a true honor to have your wisdom here today to help us navigate these silent waters.
Thank you so much for having me, Jane. It is a privilege to be here with you and with everyone listening at home. You know, in my 50 years of practicing medicine and reporting on the breakthroughs that change lives, I have realized that the most profound impact often comes not from the complex surgeries, but from the simple, quiet truths we tend to overlook. Being here today feels deeply personal to me because I have looked into the eyes of so many patients who told me they felt fine just moments before their lives changed forever. I am here because I want to help our listeners understand that while the body may grow older, it never stops communicating with us. And if we can learn to hear its whispers about things like blood clots and circulation, we can reclaim a sense of security and independence that many fear is lost after 60. I am truly looking forward to our heart-to-heart today.
Dr. Gupta, as we begin this journey today, I find myself thinking about how we all view aging. We expect the gray hair, the slower pace, and perhaps a bit of stiffness in the morning, but there is a statistic that has been haunting me lately, and I think it will shock our listeners just as much as it did me. Research suggests that every single year, the number of seniors who lose their lives to blood clots actually exceeds the combined toll of motor vehicle accidents, breast cancer, and even AIDS. It is a staggering thought that something so lethal could be happening inside us without the drama we usually associate with a medical crisis. When we reach that milestone of 60, it feels like we enter a new chapter of vulnerability that we don't quite know how to read. Why is it that this particular threat remains so hidden from our collective radar, and what is actually changing inside our bodies as we cross into these golden years that makes our blood behave so differently, almost as if it is turning against us in the dark? Are we truly, as some might fear, living with a ticking time bomb that requires no injury or accident to go off?
That is a profound and sobering way to put it, Jane, and the reality is that the ticking time bomb analogy is unfortunately very accurate for many. To understand why this happens, we have to look at the incredible yet fragile plumbing of the human body. As we cross that threshold of 60, our blood vessels undergo a transformation that we cannot see in the mirror. The inner lining of our veins, what we call the endothelium, begins to lose its youthful smoothness and becomes a bit more weathered, a bit more reactive. At the same time, the tiny cells in our blood responsible for clotting, the platelets, start to become what I often describe to my patients as sticky. It is a subtle shift in our internal chemistry where the blood is simply more prone to clumping together than it was in our 30s or 40s. This is coupled with the fact that our circulation naturally slows down as our activity levels change or as our heart becomes slightly less efficient. It creates a perfect storm where the blood pools, especially in the lower extremities. And because this process doesn't typically cause a sharp pain or a visible bruise, people assume everything is fine. I have spent decades studying these shifts, and it is heartbreaking how many people believe they are in the clear just because they haven't had a fall or a major trauma, when in reality, the mere act of living and aging is the primary risk factor.
It is terrifying to think that the very blood keeping us alive can become our greatest enemy, just by becoming a bit sticky, as you say. I think many of our listeners are sitting in their favorite armchairs right now, feeling perfectly healthy, perhaps having just finished a nice meal or watching the news, and the idea that a silent catastrophe could be forming in their legs is hard to wrap the mind around. We are taught to look for the big signs, the crushing chest pain or the sudden collapse. But you are describing a process that is almost ghostly in its silence. Is it true that these clots can form simply because we are being still? It feels counterintuitive to think that rest, which we are told we need more of as we age, could actually be the environment where this danger flourishes most. How do we reconcile the need to take it easy with the reality that our veins seem to demand constant movement to keep us safe from this hidden threat?
You've touched on the great paradox of aging, Jane. We spend our lives working hard, looking forward to the day we can finally sit back and enjoy the fruits of our labor. But from a physiological standpoint, absolute stillness is a luxury our veins cannot afford. When we are still for long periods, the muscle pump in our calves, which is essentially the engine that pushes blood back up against gravity toward the heart, goes completely dormant. Without that mechanical squeeze, the blood in our deep veins begins to stagnate. Think of a clear running stream versus a still, quiet pond. The pond is where things begin to settle and thicken. In the human body, that thickening is the beginning of a thrombus or a blood clot. The most dangerous part, and the reason I call it a silent killer, is that these clots often don't cause any inflammatory response initially. There might be no redness, no heat, and no swelling. A person can have a significant blockage in their leg and feel absolutely nothing out of the ordinary. They might just feel a bit tired or think they have a minor cramp from sleeping funny. But the underlying mechanics are relentless. If that clot breaks free, it travels through the heart and into the lungs, causing a pulmonary embolism. That is the moment the bomb goes off, and it can happen in a split second, often during a simple task like standing up to get a glass of water after a long afternoon of reading.
That image of the still pond inside our legs is something that will stay with me, and I suspect it will stay with our audience too. It brings up a very real sense of anxiety for those of us who cherish our quiet time. I hear from so many people who say, Jane, I'm not a marathon runner, but I'm healthy for my age. There's a certain pride in that, yet what you're saying suggests that our traditional definitions of feeling healthy might be failing us when it comes to vascular health. It's as if we're missing a vital piece of the puzzle because we're only looking at the surface. If the danger is this silent and this common, does it mean that every senior listening to us right now should consider themselves at risk, regardless of how well they feel? It feels like a heavy burden to carry, this constant vigilance, but perhaps that awareness is the only real shield we have against a killer that doesn't make a sound.
It is a heavy realization, yes, but I prefer to see awareness not as a burden, but as a superpower. The reality is that after 60, the risk is statistically universal, but it is not a death sentence. It is an invitation to change our relationship with our bodies. We have to move away from the no news is good news mentality. In my years of practice, I've seen that the patients who fare the best are those who acknowledge that their internal landscape has changed and they adapt accordingly. We don't need to live in fear, but we do need to live with intention. This silent killer relies on our ignorance and our stillness. By simply understanding that our blood chemistry has shifted toward that stickiness and that our veins need mechanical help to move blood, we've already disarmed a huge part of the threat. The tragedy isn't that we are aging. The tragedy is that so many lives are lost to something that is almost entirely preventable through simple daily habits. We are talking about a condition that respects no one's status or previous health record if they remain sedentary. It's about the here and now, the way you moved an hour ago and the way you'll move an hour from now. That is where the battle is won.
Dr. Gupta, one of the most heartbreaking things I hear from our listeners is the tendency to dismiss their own physical discomfort as just an inevitable part of getting older. We have this cultural narrative that after 60, your knees will ache, your back will stiffen, and your legs will feel heavy. So we learn to live with a baseline of pain and stop questioning it. It is almost as if we lose our sense of alarm because we expect things to go wrong. I wonder if you could help us understand where that line is between a normal senior ache and something far more sinister. How many people are walking around right now ignoring a subtle throb in their calf, thinking they just overdid it in the garden or slept in a strange position, when in fact their body is desperately trying to signal a life-threatening blockage?
You have hit on the exact psychological trap that claims so many lives, Jane. We call it age normalization, where we let the calendar excuse our symptoms. I remember vividly a patient of mine named Margaret Wilson, a 74-year-old grandmother living in Columbus, Ohio. Margaret was the heart of her family, always active, but she started feeling this dull, nagging ache in her right calf. She didn't fall, she didn't twist anything, so she just assumed it was a bit of muscle strain from playing with her grandkids. And so For 2 weeks, she just rubbed some ointment on it and kept going, even though the ache never quite went away. She told me later that she felt silly even mentioning it because it wasn't a sharp pain. But when she finally came in, not because of the pain, but because her daughter noticed she was limping slightly, we performed an ultrasound. What we found was terrifying. Margaret had a deep vein thrombosis, a blood clot that stretched almost the entire length of her deep vein. It was a miracle that a piece hadn't broken off and traveled to her lungs during those 2 weeks of ignoring it.
That is absolutely chilling to think about, Margaret just going about her life in Columbus with such a massive threat hidden in her leg. It makes me realize how dangerous our modesty can be, the way we don't want to be a bother to our doctors or our families for something that feels minor. If Margaret had continued to wait, perhaps another week or even just a few more days, what is the clinical reality of what would have happened? It seems we often wait for the leg to turn blue or swell to twice its size before we take it seriously. But in Margaret's case, it sounds like those classic dramatic signs weren't even there to warn her.
That is the most important lesson from Margaret's story, Jane. The classic signs of a red, hot, swollen leg only appear in about half of all cases. For the other half, it is just like Margaret experienced, a vague discomfort that feels like a cramp that won't quit. If she hadn't come in, that clot would have continued to grow, becoming more unstable. At any moment, a simple movement like stepping off a curb or even a deep cough could have caused a fragment of that clot to snap off. Once it's in the bloodstream, it races toward the heart and lodges in the pulmonary arteries. We call that a pulmonary embolism, and it can be fatal within minutes. Margaret was essentially walking on a landmine. When I explained this to her in my office in Ohio, the color drained from her face. She realized that her desire to not be a burden almost cost her everything. This is why I tell everyone that if you have a persistent ache in one leg that doesn't have a clear cause like a direct injury, you must treat it as an emergency until proven otherwise.
It's a powerful wake-up call for all of us to stop being so polite with our health. We tend to prioritize our convenience over our survival. Listening to you describe Margaret's situation, I can't help but think of the thousands of others in similar towns who are making that same gamble every single day. We need to reclaim the right to be concerned about the small things, because in the world of vascular health, there really is no such thing as a small symptom when you're over 60. It's about shifting our mindset from "it's probably nothing" to "I need to be sure." And that shift alone could save more lives than any high-tech intervention. There is a certain sense of security that comes with being an active senior. I know so many people who pride themselves on their morning walks, their golf games, or their yoga classes, believing that because they aren't couch potatoes, they are somehow immune to these circulatory issues. We have been told for decades that exercise is the magic bullet. But I have been reading some unsettling research lately that suggests we might be overestimating the protection that a single hour of exercise provides if the rest of our day is spent in relative stillness. Is it possible, Dr. Gupta, that our active lifestyle is actually masking a hidden danger? Are we falling into a false sense of safety by thinking that a 30-minute walk in the morning can cancel out the hours we spend sitting at a computer, driving, or enjoying a long dinner?
Jane, this is one of the most difficult truths for people to accept because it challenges our entire definition of fitness. There was a groundbreaking study published in the Journal of Thrombosis and Hemostasis that really sent shockwaves through the medical community. It found that individuals who sat for more than 8 hours a day had double the risk of developing a life-threatening blood clot, and here is the kicker. That risk remained significantly elevated even if those people did a vigorous workout every single morning. We call this the active couch potato syndrome. You see, your body doesn't bank the benefits of movement the way we think it does. When you sit still for hours, the blood in your lower legs begins to pool and stagnate regardless of how many miles you ran at 7 o'clock a.m. The physiological changes, the stickiness of the platelets, and the slowing of the blood flow happen in real time. Exercise is wonderful for your heart and muscles, but it is not a 24-hour shield against the physical reality of prolonged stillness.
That is a very sobering revelation for those of us who felt we were doing everything right. It's almost as if the body has a very short memory for movement. If I understand you correctly, the danger isn't necessarily a lack of exercise in the traditional sense, but rather the presence of stillness throughout the day. It's a subtle distinction, but a vital one. It means we can't just check exercise off our to-do list in the morning and then forget about our circulation for the next 12 hours. For a senior who spends their afternoon reading or crafting, this must feel like a daunting new rule to follow. How do we start to think about movement not as a session we perform, but as a continuous necessity for our veins to stay open and healthy?
We have to stop thinking of movement as work and start thinking of it as flushing the system. Think of your veins like a plumbing system where the pump only works when you move your legs. If you turn the pump off for 4 hours while you watch a movie or fly across the country, the water in the pipes becomes sluggish and starts to collect sediment. I've seen marathon runners in their 60s develop clots because they sat still for a 6-hour flight right after a race. Their bodies were fit, but their veins were stagnant. The key is frequency, not just intensity. We need to break the stillness cycle every hour, even if it's just for a minute or two. This is a complete shift in perspective. It means that the most important exercise you do today might not be the walk in the park, but the simple act of standing up and stretching your calves while the commercials are on. We are fighting a battle against the cumulative effect of gravity and inactivity, and that battle requires us to be active in small bursts all day long.
It is almost ironic that the activities we associate with comfort and relaxation in our later years, watching a favorite series, playing cards with friends, or catching up on the news, could be the very things putting us in harm's way. We've cultivated a lifestyle where sitting is the default position for leisure. I think about the millions of seniors who spend their evenings in a recliner, feeling perfectly at peace, unaware that their blood flow might be dropping to dangerously low levels. It's an invisible threat because sitting doesn't feel dangerous. It feels like the reward for a long life of hard work. Could you take us deeper into what is actually happening in those moments of deep relaxation, and perhaps share a story of how this leisurely danger manifests in real life?
It is a silent transition from rest to risk, Jane. I often think of Robert Jenkins, a 68-year-old retired engineer from Phoenix, Arizona. Robert was a brilliant man who loved history. After he retired, he spent hours every day in his favorite armchair, deeply engrossed in historical documentaries and books. He felt he was living the dream, finally having the time to learn everything he wanted. But Robert didn't realize that while his mind was traveling through history, his blood was barely moving at all. When you sit in a chair, especially one that might press against the back of your thighs, the blood flow in your lower legs can slow down by as much as 80%. Imagine a river suddenly turning into a slow-moving swamp. For Robert, this happened day after day in Phoenix. He didn't feel anything until one evening when he stood up to go to bed and felt an unusual shortness of breath. He thought it was just the Arizona heat, or perhaps he was coming down with a cold. In reality, a clot had formed during those long hours of reading and had already begun to migrate.
It is so frightening how Robert's intellectual passion became a physical trap. In Phoenix or anywhere else, the setting is so domestic and safe. A chair, a book, a TV. You don't expect your hobby to be a health hazard. When Robert felt that shortness of breath, he did what many of us do. He rationalized it. He looked for an external cause, like the heat. How do we train ourselves to recognize that a sudden change in how we feel, even something as common as being winded, might actually be a signal that our sedentary habits have finally caught up with us? It seems the sofa is not as innocent as it looks.
The sofa can be a very dangerous place if it becomes a permanent station. In Robert's case, he was lucky because his wife insisted they go to the urgent care. They found that he had multiple small clots in his lungs, all originating from his legs. He told me, "Doctor, I was just sitting there. I wasn't doing anything wrong." And I told him, "Robert, that's exactly it. You weren't doing anything. The stillness allows the platelets to settle and bond. It's a mechanical issue. After 60, our bodies simply don't have the buffer they used to. We can't tolerate hours of inactivity because our vessels are less elastic and our blood is naturally more prone to clotting. We have to treat sitting like we treat sun exposure. A little is fine, but too much without protection. In this case, movement will cause damage." Robert had to learn to set a timer on his watch. Every 45 minutes, no matter how good the documentary was, he had to get up and walk around the kitchen. He had to learn that his rest needed to be interrupted to be safe. It's a hard lesson, but it's one that turned his life around and likely saved him from a much more catastrophic event.
There's a beautiful yet haunting idea that our bodies are always talking to us. But as we get older, we often stop listening or we stop understanding the language. We wait for the shouting, the intense pain, or the obvious emergency, and we ignore the whispers. You've mentioned that there are subtle shifts, like a leg feeling slightly heavy or a patch of skin feeling unusually warm, that are actually early warning signs of circulation failure. Why do we find it so easy to overlook these whispers? Is it because they are so fleeting, or because we simply haven't been taught what they mean? I'd love to hear how these early quiet signals played out for someone you've treated and what it taught you about the golden window of prevention.
We are conditioned to look for the dramatic, Jane, but biology is often very subtle. I often tell the story of a patient I met while consulting on a case, a woman who had a very keen sense of her own body but still almost missed the signs. She would describe a sensation of heaviness in her limb, almost as if she were wearing a lead weights around her ankle, but only at the end of the day. She didn't have the sharp pain we talk about with Margaret or the shortness of breath like Robert. Instead, her body was whispering. These whispers happen because when a small clot begins to form, the body tries to compensate. It tries to push blood through smaller collateral vessels. This causes a mild congestion, which feels like heaviness or a slight fullness in the calf. If you touch the area, it might feel just a degree or two warmer than the other leg. This is the golden window I talk about. If we catch it here, we can often treat it with simple lifestyle changes or mild medications before it becomes a crisis.
This idea of heaviness is something I think every senior has felt at some point, perhaps after a long day of walking or even just standing in the kitchen. It's so easy to say, oh, my legs are just tired today. But you're saying that if it's localized to one side, or if that warmth is there, it's a specific signal that the plumbing is struggling. It requires a level of self-awareness that is almost meditative. We have to actually check in with ourselves, comparing one leg to the other, looking for those tiny discrepancies. Why is that golden window so critical? Is it because the clot is still soft or attached at that point, making it less likely to cause a stroke or an embolism?
Exactly. In those early stages, the clot is often still forming or is firmly adhered to the vein wall, and the inflammatory response hasn't reached its peak. The heaviness is the fluid backing up, not yet a total blockage. If we intervene then, the risk of the clot breaking off is significantly lower. I remember a patient who noticed that her sock left a much deeper indentation on her left ankle than her right at the end of the day. She didn't have pain, she just had that heavy feeling. Because she didn't wait for the shout, we were able to get her on a simple regimen that cleared the congestion and prevented a major DVT. When we ignore the whispers, we are essentially allowing the fire to grow until it hits the structure of the house. By the time you feel pain, the clot is often large, stable, and much more difficult to manage. We have to teach ourselves to be body detectives, looking for the slight swelling, the subtle warmth, the unexplained fullness. Those are the messages that, if answered, keep us out of the emergency room and keep our independence intact.
As we get further into this, it becomes clear that there are certain red flags that should never be bargained with. We've talked about the whispers, but now I want to talk about the signals that are a bit louder, the ones that should make us stop everything and call a doctor. It's not just about the legs, is it? I've heard you speak before about how circulation issues can manifest in ways that seem totally unrelated, like a brief moment of confusion or a slight slur in speech that disappears as quickly as it came. For many seniors, these moments are dismissed as senior moments or just getting a bit tired. Could you help us identify these critical warnings, perhaps through the experience of someone who saw these signs and didn't realize they were standing on the edge of a much larger medical event?
You're right to point out that the vascular system is one continuous network, Jane. What happens in the legs can very quickly affect the brain or the lungs. I think of Helen Carter, an 82-year-old woman from Portland, Oregon. Helen was very sharp, but she started having these glitches, as she called them. She would be talking to her friend, and for maybe 30 seconds she couldn't find the right words, or her hand would feel a bit weak. Then it would pass, and she would feel fine. She also noticed that her left calf felt tight, almost like she had a permanent muscle knot. She lived in Portland, a beautiful city where people walk a lot, so she just thought she was overexerting herself. What Helen was experiencing were TIAs, Transient ischemic attacks, often called mini strokes, combined with the early signs of a blood clot in her leg. Her body wasn't whispering anymore, it was starting to yell, but because the symptoms were transient and went away, she didn't think they were an emergency.
It's that word transient that is so dangerous, isn't it? If the symptom goes away, we convince ourselves that the danger went away too. We think, oh, I'm fine now, so it couldn't have been serious. But in Helen's case, those brief moments in Portland were actually harbingers of something much bigger. It seems almost cruel that the body gives us a warning that is so easy to ignore. How do we distinguish between a simple, harmless lapse in memory and a TIA? And why is it so vital to connect that tightness in the leg with what is happening in the brain? It feels like we need to start looking at our bodies as a whole, rather than a collection of separate parts.
That is the crucial shift, Jane. You cannot separate the leg from the brain. If your blood is sticky enough to form a clot in your calf, it is sticky enough to cause issues in the small vessels of your brain. Helen's tight calf was the source, and those glitches were tiny warning shots across the bow. A TIA is a medical emergency precisely because it is often followed by a full-blown stroke within days or weeks. When I spoke with Helen, she admitted she had felt the tightness for a month but didn't want to make a fuss over a cramp. We have to realize that after 60, any new unexplained weakness, any brief difficulty speaking, or any persistent localized leg discomfort is a signal that your circulatory highway is experiencing a dangerous backup. In Helen's case, we were able to stabilize her circulation and prevent that major stroke, but only because her daughter eventually noticed the glitches and insisted on a checkup. We have to be vigilant for ourselves and for each other. If it feels weird or different, even if it only lasts for a minute, it counts. It matters. It is your body's last-ditch effort to get your attention before the bomb goes off.
We often talk about food as medicine, and for many of us, we've spent our lives trying to eat right, lowering our cholesterol, watching our sugar, trying to stay slim. But there is a specific type of internal damage that comes from our modern diet that specifically targets the health of our blood vessels. I've heard you discuss how even if we are active, if our inner tubes, our veins and arteries are inflamed or irritated by what we eat, the risk of a clot forming is much higher. It's as if we are putting high-quality fuel into a car with rusty, narrowed pipes. Could you explain this connection between our dinner plate and the stickiness of our blood? Why is it that some foods we think are okay might actually be making our blood more prone to turning into those dangerous still ponds you mentioned earlier?
This is where the science of inflammation becomes so personal, Jane. We used to think that clots were just about not moving, but we now know that chronic inflammation makes the blood vessels much more hospitable to clots. When we eat a diet high in processed foods, hidden sugars, and excessive sodium, the staples of many modern diets, we create a state of low-grade inflammation throughout our entire vascular system. This irritation makes the lining of the veins rougher, which gives those sticky platelets something to grab onto. It's like the difference between a smooth slide and one covered in sandpaper. Even if you are walking every morning, if your internal slide is rough because of a diet that causes inflammation, the blood is more likely to snag and start clumping. I've seen patients who were quite fit and active, but their blood work showed high levels of inflammatory markers because of their reliance on convenient processed meals. They were doing the work on the outside, but their inside was a high-risk environment.
It's a shocking thought that our convenient lifestyle is sabotaging our physical efforts. We think we're being good by getting our steps in, but then we sit down to a meal that essentially primes our blood to clot. It feels like a constant uphill battle. You mentioned sodium and sugar, which we know are bad for blood pressure, but how do they specifically affect the clumping of blood? Is it that they change the actual chemistry of the blood, or do they just damage the vessel walls? It seems we need to be much more intentional about what we're putting into our bodies if we want our movement to actually count for something.
It's actually both, Jane. High sugar levels can lead to glycation, where sugar molecules bond to proteins in the blood, making them stickier and more prone to aggregation. High sodium can cause the blood vessel walls to swell and become less efficient at moving blood. But the biggest culprit is the overall inflammatory load. When the body is in a state of inflammation, it produces more clotting factors as a natural defense mechanism. It thinks it's under attack and needs to be ready to seal wounds. But when there is no wound, those clotting factors just circulate, looking for a place to settle. This is why I tell my patients that the best blood thinner is often a diet rich in anti-inflammatory foods like leafy greens, berries, and omega-3s. These foods help grease the pipes and calm the system. You can't outrun a bad diet when it comes to vascular health. The two must work in tandem: movement to keep the blood flowing, and a clean diet to ensure the blood itself is slippery and the vessels are smooth.
So far, we've talked about the dangers, the hidden signs, and the biological traps we fall into. But I want to shift our focus to something incredibly empowering. You've often referred to the calf muscles as our second heart. It's a fascinating concept. The idea that we have this built-in pump in our lower legs that is just waiting to be activated. If the heart is the primary engine, then these muscles are the boosters that keep the circulation from failing in our most vulnerable areas. I'm curious about the specific, simple habits that can literally save a life. Is there a way for us to activate this second heart without needing a gym or expensive equipment? Can you share a story of how a very simple, almost trivial habit made a profound difference for someone, especially as they reach their later decades?
This is my favorite part of the conversation, Jane, because it brings the power back to the individual. I think of a remarkable man named Thomas Lee. Thomas is 90 years old and lives in San Jose, California. When I first met him, he was worried because he had seen so many of his friends lose their mobility or worse due to strokes and clots. Thomas wasn't a world-class athlete. He was just a man who wanted to stay independent. He adopted one simple rule: the calf activation rule. Every single hour that he was awake, he would spend just 2 minutes doing heel-toe lifts while sitting or standing. He would lift his heels off the floor, then his toes back and forth. This simple action flexes the gastrocnemius and soleus muscles, the calf muscles, which literally squeezes the deep veins and shoots the blood back up toward the heart. Thomas has been doing this for years in San Jose, and despite his age and a relatively quiet lifestyle, his circulation is that of a much younger man. He has avoided the heaviness, the swelling, and the clots that plague so many of his peers.
90 years old and still maintaining that independence in San Jose. That is truly inspiring, Dr. Gupta. It seems almost too simple to be true, that just lifting your heels could be the difference between a life-threatening clot and healthy circulation. But when you explain the mechanics, it makes perfect sense. You're manually doing the work that gravity is trying to prevent. For those of us listening, is there a prescription for this? How often and for how long should we be doing these calf exercises? And is there a particular way to do them that maximizes the squeeze on those deep veins? It feels like this is a prescription we can all fill right now, for free.
It really is the most cost-effective medicine in the world, Jane. The University of Otago did a fascinating study on this and found that breaking up sitting time with just 2 minutes of calf exercises every 30 to 60 minutes significantly reduced the markers of blood clotting. My prescription is simple: don't let 60 minutes pass without waking up your second heart. You can do it while you're brushing your teeth, while you're waiting for the microwave, or even while you're sitting in your chair watching this podcast. Just 10 to 15 repetitions of lifting your heels high, then pulling your toes up. You want to feel that muscle contract. That is the pump in action. Thomas Lee tells me it's just become part of his rhythm now, like breathing. He doesn't even think about it. And that's the goal, to make movement a habit rather than a chore. When you activate those calves, you are giving your primary heart a much-needed rest and ensuring that the still ponds in your legs never have a chance to form. It's a tiny action with a massive life-saving result.
As we approach the end of our time today, I want to make sure we leave our audience with a very clear, actionable survival guide. We've covered so much ground, from the dangers of stillness to the power of the second heart. But I also know that there are other factors like hydration that play a massive role in how thick or sticky our blood becomes. Many seniors struggle with drinking enough water, either because they don't feel thirsty or because they want to avoid frequent trips to the bathroom. Could you bring all these threads together for us? If you had to give a golden rule for vascular health after 60, combining movement, hydration, and awareness, what would that look like in a daily routine? How can we make these changes sustainable so they don't just feel like another set of medical orders to follow?
If I could boil it down to one golden rule, Jane, it would be this: flow is life. Everything we do should be aimed at keeping the blood moving and keeping it thin. Hydration is a massive, often overlooked part of that. As we age, our thirst mechanism becomes less sensitive, meaning we can be quite dehydrated without even knowing it. When you're dehydrated, your blood volume drops and the blood that remains becomes thicker, sometimes up to 30% more viscous. Imagine trying to pump honey through a straw instead of water. That thick honey blood is a playground for clots. So the routine is simple. Start your day with a large glass of water and keep a bottle with you. Pair that with our calf activation every hour. Think of it as a hydration and motion duo. Every time you take a sip of water, do 10 heel lifts. By linking the two, you ensure that you're both thinning the blood chemically and moving it mechanically. This isn't just a medical order, it's a lifestyle of self-respect.
Flow is life. That is a beautiful and easy mantra to remember. It shifts the focus from avoiding death to promoting life. It's a much more positive way to look at our health. I love the idea of pairing the water with the movement. It creates a rhythm that even the busiest or most relaxed senior can follow. But I also want to touch on the awareness piece one last time. For someone who has followed all the rules but still feels that whisper we talked about, what is the one thing they should do? We've talked about the golden window, but when you're in that moment of uncertainty, what is the best first step to take to ensure you're not ignoring a potential crisis?
The most important step is to trust your intuition and seek a professional evaluation immediately. Never ever feel silly for going to a doctor for a symptom that turns out to be nothing. I would rather see 1,000 false alarms than one patient who waited too long. If you feel that localized heaviness, that unexplained warmth, or if you have a glitch in your speech or movement, call your doctor or go to an urgent care. Tell them specifically, I am concerned about a blood clot, or I am concerned about my circulation. Be your own strongest advocate. The tests for these things, like a simple D-dimer blood test or a leg ultrasound, are non-invasive and very quick. They can give you the peace of mind to continue your flow is life routine, or they can catch a problem while it's still manageable. Remember, the golden window is only open if you choose to walk through it. Your health, your independence, and your future are worth that one phone call or that one unnecessary visit.
Dr. Gupta, we have reached the end of what has been a truly eye-opening conversation. We began by talking about a silent killer, but I feel we are ending with a message of profound hope and agency. You've shown us that while aging brings its challenges, we are not helpless victims of our biology. There is something deeply moving about the idea that these small, quiet actions, a sip of water, a lift of the heel, a moment of listening to our own bodies, are the keys to staying present and active in the lives of those we love. As we say goodbye to our audience, what is the one thing you want them to hold on to when the podcast ends? What is the heart of the message you've carried through 50 years of medicine that you want to leave with every senior listening today?
My message is this: your life is not just measured in the years you've lived, but in the quality and independence of those years. We often fear death, but for many seniors, the greater fear is the loss of the ability to live on their own terms, to walk in their garden, to travel, to hold their grandchildren. Blood clots and circulation issues don't just threaten our lives, they threaten our freedom. But that freedom is something you can protect every single day. Don't wait for your body to scream before you start listening to its whispers. You have the power right now in your own chair to change the course of your health. It has been an honor to share these stories with you, Jane. I hope that everyone listening feels not just warned, but inspired. Inspired to move, inspired to hydrate, and inspired to cherish the incredible vessel that has carried them through 6, 7, or 8 decades. Thank you for giving me the space to speak to the heart of this community. It has been a true joy.
Thank you, Dr. Gupta. Your wisdom and your compassion have turned a frightening subject into a clear path forward. I feel more empowered, and I know our listeners do too. We are so grateful for your 50 years of service and for the time you've spent with us today. To everyone at home, thank you for joining us on Healthy Kidneys After 60. We hope this conversation helps you find more flow in your life and gives you the confidence to listen to your body's unique language. If you found today's episode helpful, please consider subscribing to our channel and sharing this with a friend or a loved one. Your support helps us continue to bring these vital conversations to seniors everywhere. Join us for our next podcast, where we will continue to explore the simple, powerful ways you can thrive in your golden years. Until then, stay active, stay hydrated, and take good care of yourselves. I'm Jane Pauley, and we'll see you next time.